Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. My name is Gawdat Bahgat. I'm professor at National Defense University, and would like to welcome all of you to a very special panel on the war between Israel and Iran and the different options United States is considering or pursuing. And we have very special three speakers today. And first one, Dr. Kenneth Katzman. He has long experience with Congressional Research Service, and he is a fellow at Sofan Center. And also we have with us Dr. Yasmine Farouk. She currently with Crisis Group, and she worked before with European Institute of Peace and Baker Institute and many other think tanks. And also we have with us Tim Constantine, and he is the host of Capitol Hill Show. And to his credit, he interviewed 20 heads of states, including President Trump. So I promise all our audience will have very good discussion. And I thought the way I plan to structure the session today, we will talk about the three different levels: national, regional, international. And before we finish, I will ask the three speakers if they have final thoughts in case I miss any point. But we will start with Ken. Ken served for many years in the Congressional Research Service. The news, President Trump is considering making decisions in about 2 weeks. My question, since you worked for advising the Congress or providing recommendation what the Congress should or should not do, can you shed light on what role the Congress can play in deciding the shape and form of United States role in this war?
Okay, well, I was asked to do that as well as forecast the trajectory. Unfortunately,
we will talk about the future in a few minutes, but for now, if you can talk about what role, not in legal terms, in political terms, what role the Congress has.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gawdat. Well, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good news today to present to the audience. There's not a lot of very viable off-ramps for this crisis, but I would say the Congress, the Congress and the Trump administration are unified that the preferable pathway out of this crisis is a diplomatic solution. But achieving that solution is very difficult. The Israeli air campaign, even it has perhaps reduced Iran's options to develop a nuclear weapon, has not shaken Iran's non-negotiable insistence on that it will not dismantle its uranium enrichment program. The Congress largely agrees. I would say both parties agree that the U.S. should insist on full dismantlement of uranium enrichment. Now, there are some differences. Obviously, the Democrats criticized Mr. Trump because he pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal when he was in his first term. And many of the Democrats' view is that if Mr. Trump had not pulled out of that agreement, we would not have this crisis because Iran would have had a very, very limited uranium enrichment stockpile till now. There is agreement, or there's an argument in Congress that even if Mr. Trump were to strike, even one strike, let's say on one facility, which we're going to discuss, I'm sure, the Fordo facility, even a limited U.S. action threatens to embroil the United States in a broader and expanding war, and therefore the president should get authorization from there are many in Congress that believe the president should get authorization from Congress, even for an airstrike. Now, in the past few decades, it's generally been the tradition that Congress has not insisted on specifically authorizing airstrikes. Again, the Constitution authorizes the Congress to declare war. The War Powers Act limits the president's power to introduce troops or engage in hostilities for an extended period of time. But there's been an understanding, at least since the 9/11 attacks and longer ago than that, that airstrikes generally, the Congress allows the president latitude to undertake airstrikes against targets without specific authorization. There has been also a general understanding for decades that introducing U.S. ground forces into hostilities, into either invasion, like the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the 1991 U.S. action against Saddam Hussein in Kuwait and Afghanistan, introducing ground forces needs congressional authorization. The Congress has tended to insist that introducing ground forces requires authorization. Airstrikes, usually not. In this case, many in Congress are demanding that Congress authorize even airstrikes on Iran because of the potential for even one airstrike to cause a broader U.S. involvement. Now, well, we need to also understand that in the current context, again, Senator Kaine has introduced this resolution about requiring specific authorization. Mostly supporting it are Democrats. Rand Paul, the Republican, might support it. He's toying with it, but it comes in the context of other discussions about presidential powers totally unrelated to Iran, in terms of tariffs, in terms of deportation of illegal aliens, and so it's become wrapped up in broader issues. So there is a debate about authorizing Congress in even limited strikes in Iran.
This is very good. Basically, as you said, there is no consensus, there is no agreement. Tim, you interviewed President Trump not long time ago, and my understanding, he has to balance between two opposing opinions. On one side, some people believe it is America first and we should not intervene. Israel started the war, it is Israel's war. And other people believe Israel is U.S. closest ally, United States should intervene. Can you, if this is correct, can you explain more? If it is not correct, can you correct me and give the right picture?
Sure. And I think the thing that I've taken note of in these past couple of weeks is Americans are so hungry for instant gratification that we expect the news to unfold in the next 2 hours. What did Trump say last hour, as opposed to what has his policy been for 10 years? And I try to look at, I have had conversations with the president, but I also look at what he has said, not yesterday. I mean, I listened to what he said yesterday, but I don't solely base my opinion on what might happen based on the most recent thing only. I look, and over the last 10 years, since he entered politics, there have been two things that he has been extremely consistent about. And one of those is making sure that there's a nuclear-free Iran. In 2015, about the time he came down that escalator, then he was talking about nuclear-free Iran. That has never changed. And so I think that's a very, very important point here. And then the other half of it, though, is despite the bluster, despite the rude approach to how he speaks, he has always pushed peace. That is his top priority. When he got reelected in November, you saw a president who immediately assembled a team with Steve Witkoff and others sent them before he was even sworn back in, sent them and tried to establish a ceasefire, tried to work on peace in the Middle East. That was his number one priority. So you take these two things and you're balancing those. All right, he wants a nuclear-free Iran. He wants peace. Can he get both? And the question keeps coming too is who's influencing his decision-making? We just heard some good information on Congress. And Congress, this is at any time the United States has any conflict. Doesn't matter whether the president is a Democrat or a Republican. Congress will make sure they give them a little leeway, but they try to reel them in. They don't want the president to go too far down the road without working with Congress. And I think the same thing here. You see some who are objecting loudly, but I don't think the president will make his decision based on that. He'll take all that in, but Congress has some influence. His staff, obviously, the people around him that he trusts and he likes will have some influence. Benjamin Netanyahu will have some influence. I appear on several of the networks in the region, and many of the folks there are convinced that Netanyahu and Trump are hand in hand, and whatever Netanyahu wants, Trump will do. And I always assure them, while they are a close ally, they are not the 51st state. And to your point, Trump's big line is America first. He's going to decide what he believes is in America's best interest. And if that happens to align with Israel, okay. But if it doesn't, I would expect him to step away from Israel if he believes the United States' best interests are served in a different way. So Netanyahu, the phone calls, the conversations, I'm told they speak literally every single day right now. That information is certainly going to have an impact on President Trump. But the biggest influence is going to be the American public and what they think. And the American public, if you ask, do you think it's a good idea? There was actually a Rasmussen poll that did this. Do you think it's a good idea for Iran to have a nuclear weapon? And it's something like 81% say no. It's an overwhelming, there's no poll where 81% of Americans agree. So that was an amazing number. But when you take that to the next step and you ask, should the US military get involved? Should we put our men and women, the troops on the ground? That's a whole different story. So Donald Trump, maybe more than any president in my adult lifetime, is aware that he is forming his legacy. And every time a president is in his last couple of months, there's talk about what will his legacy be. And I swear some of them haven't even thought of it until then. They've just gone about their business. But Trump is very aware he would like to leave a legacy. And what he has historically told us is he'd like that legacy to be peace. So I think it's going to be a high hurdle to see him get involved. The other part of that, though, is stability in the Middle East rests on what decisions are made here. Even if Iran agrees to something right now, they have a history of edging away from that over time. Whatever they've agreed to, sometimes they won't let inspectors in. Sometimes there are other things. So we'll have to wait and see how all that unfolds. But I do think that's the biggest thing. What does the American public think? Not the media, but what does the average American think?
I'm very glad, Tim, you brought Prime Minister Netanyahu. And before we move to Yasmine, we would like to press you on one point, because President Trump dismissed the reports by the intelligence community. The intelligence community says till today, Iran has not made the decision to make the bomb. And it looks that President Trump has accepted Prime Minister Netanyahu's assessment that Iran is moving ahead with the nuclear. The question I have, many people wonder, are we going back to the war with Iraq when intelligence was politicized? Do you agree or disagree?
I have raised that question all week long when we talk about, does the U.S. need to get involved with the B-2 and bunker buster bombs in order to take this facility that is allegedly 300 feet below the earth or more? My question is, do we know that that facility exists? Because I think, to your point, could you have another weapons of mass destruction that doesn't really exist? Could you go in and bomb that? and turns out there's nothing there, or there is not the facility that we believe is there. So I don't know. I'm not on the inside on that particular conversation, but I don't know what that is. I do think it's legitimate to question Netanyahu saying, oh, they're 2 weeks away, because Netanyahu appears about every other year in front of the United Nations, as long as my recent memory, saying, oh, they're this close to a nuclear weapon. They're this close to a nuclear, except then 2 years we're in the same spot. So I don't know that that's, I understand they're concerned. Iran has threatened to annihilate Israel. I would be concerned if I were Netanyahu, but do I trust that that is accurate information?
Yeah.
I don't know that I do.
I once Googled, and from 1990, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been saying next year Iran will have the bomb, and we are now 2025. Yasmine, I'm very glad to have you and have many questions, and I'm sure you will shed light on many issues. Probably the biggest question I have, GCC states have been focusing very much on energy transition, on Vision 2023, Vision 2045, and so on renewable energy, on AI, and this how they approach Iran now. They approach the nuclear negotiation in very different way than when President Obama was in office. How do you see them? Do you agree that the main reason they don't want war, they don't want instability, is because they are focusing on national development? And second question is, President Trump just visited the Gulf region last month, and many agreements, many huge investments were signed. Do Gulf states have leverage? Can they play a role? They have good relations with United States. Some of them have good relations with Israel, and now almost all of them have good relations with Iran. What role do you see Gulf states can play in this crisis?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting me. It's very nice to see you, Dr. Bahgat. It has been a while. First of all, I always like to highlight before speaking about the Gulf countries that although they share some common positions, especially when it comes to threat perception, we cannot really say that they share the exact same position, all the 6 of them. Maybe some of them, maybe the majority of them, but there are nuances and differences that we can get into when in the Q&A. To your first question, I keep thinking of the 2003 situation when the United States invaded Iraq. Gulf countries did not like Saddam Hussein back then. They were very happy to see him go, but the problem was how it was done, the consequences, the planning that was absent, and at least in the case of 2003, the US had troops on the ground, had some consideration for how far it should go, had some kind of planning that ultimately failed also, but had some kind of idea of what could come next, what are the objectives to be achieved. I think this is a similar situation where Gulf countries, there is no love lost with Iran. There has been a development and a big progress on confidence building measures. There has been communication channels that we have seen being very effective in shielding the Gulf countries from the spillover of the military escalation that has been taking place over the past 2 years. But there's still no trust. So if the question is, do they all want Iran's nuclear program under monitoring and safeguards? The answer is definitely yes. The problem is the way it is done. And I think the problem with the current war is that, one, as you perfectly have put it, they have been trying to de-escalate tensions to limit their own involvement in military conflicts now, I would say, over the past 5 years. the war in Gaza and the regional rebounds of the war in Gaza, whether in Yemen or in Iraq or in the Red Sea or in Lebanon, or were already challenging that. I believe that none of them wanted to see a full-fledged war on Iran, especially a war where the objectives continue to evolve every day. It started with dismantling the nuclear program, and then we're hearing about, Iran's conventional capability, if you call the missiles conventional capability, and then we're talking about Israel, precisely, is talking about regime change, and now we're talking about U.S. intervention. And I think this is what worries more the Gulf countries, is that this can very easily get out of hands. And because, as we have seen with this Israeli government in particular, there is only one consideration, which is what Israel wants. And so far, with the exception of one ceasefire in January, the United States hasn't been willing, or at least this is how it is seen in the Gulf countries, the United States hasn't been willing to curb a bit that war, if you want, thirst, and that Israeli wish to dismantle and put an end to every single threat that it sees in the region. So that would be my answer to your first question, and I'm happy to develop more in the Q&A. To your second question about Gulf states having leverage on President Trump, I'll echo my colleague here. I think it is hard to say that any country or any leader has leverage over President Trump. I think he has made it clear since forever that he sees himself and the United States as the ultimate decision makers and the most powerful country, and he's the most powerful leader in the world. What we can see is some influence on President Trump. But even this influence has its limits. And I think part of the smart strategy that some Gulf leaders have followed during his visit to the Gulf is to focus this influence on the bilateral relationship, on what they can gain as countries for, as you mentioned, in technology, AI, access to arms, security cooperation and defense cooperation with the United States, rather than on regional peace and security or solving the conflicts. And particularly when it comes to Iran, to Iran, yes, and to Israel. They know that President Trump has some fixed ideas, so they have been trying. As if I'm not mistaken, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is the leader that called President Trump right after the attack, and the message was a message of de-escalation. Because right before Israel started its strikes on Iran, there was an American proposal on the table. There was a Saudi support and a general Gulf support to finding a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear program. And President Trump was on board with that solution. So they are trying to influence President Trump, but I don't think that there would be a willingness to risk the bilateral relationship with President Trump and with the United States by putting or hinting that they could pressure or that they want to put pressure on him.
I believe between the three of you, we have like 100 years of experience, and this is great. And if I can bring you back to the discussion, I'm glad Yasmine mentioned Israel, and many people now believe Israel is emerging as the regional hegemon, that Israel is in war in Gaza, in Lebanon, strikes Syria, Iran. With this in mind, do you see that Arab countries, Turkey and Iran, will try to will work together to balance the unconditional power of Israel? I mean, I remember one scholar mentioned that power begs to be balanced. And now Israel is by far the strongest regional power. Do you see kind of long-term realliance in the Middle East?
We've been seeing a balance of power shift for at least a year now, since Israel began its offensives against the axis of resistance. Now, I think a lot of what you're asking depends on the outcome of this conflict. There's a school of thought that would say that the Arab states particularly are going to draw closer to Israel if Iran does accede to Mr. Trump's demands and eliminate its uranium enrichment capacity. By the way, I would answer Tim. Fordo definitely exists. The IAEA is there. They go there. They see it. I mean, we can discuss whether the product of it is going into a nuclear weapon or not, but the facility definitely exists. The IAEA is there periodically, but it's got a lot fewer centrifuges than the facility the Israelis knocked out. But it can still, it'll take you longer, but you can still keep enriching uranium as long as you've got some centrifuges. So even though Fordo has fewer, it can still enrich to that level that's needed. But the Arab state, it really is Israel a hegemon? I mean, my soundings, I mean, the Arab states understand that Israel was very, very badly shaken psychologically by the October 7th attack on Israel. I think that's clear. I think the Arab leaders understand it. Now, do they have questions about it? The way Israel has reacted, the extent of Israel's reaction? Yes. Do they view it as an overreaction? Yes. But, in terms of you're asking, is Israel viewed as a hegemon? I mean, the Arab leaders understand Israel did not start the October 7. They may have overreacted. They may be overreacting, but they were responding to a real attack. It was not an imagined threat. I think some of the Arab leaders have some questions about the way Israel has attacked Assad weaponry in Syria. There's questions whether that's necessary, whether the new government there is really a threat, and maybe Israel's overreacting there as well. Now, Iran, I think whether there's an effort to balance Israel out is going to depend on how this conflict comes out. And unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic that this conflict is going to come out that well. I see positions hardening on all sides. I think Trump's decision-making is getting narrowed. The Iranian regime has not shown inclination to compromise on the demand to eliminate uranium enrichment. Mr. Trump is not going to back down on that demand. And if Iran doesn't compromise, he probably is going to strike Fordo at some point. And that you can see how this can easily spiral out of control, very easily. Then Iran might retaliate against U.S. personnel. What if some are killed? What if there's a mass casualty among U.S. personnel? Very easy to see scenarios that we can't imagine today actually coming to fruition in this conflict. So I think we're at a very dangerous inflection point here.
I think we might have a technical problem. If Anas allows me, can I come in reaction to some of Ken's remarks? I guess I can't. I'll take the silence as a yes.
Just go ahead.
I mean, just on two things. One,
please go ahead. Sorry,
yes,
no there is absolutely technical problems. Please go ahead.
I mean, if I can respond on two things. One, on how the Gulf countries, I mean, they both pertain on how the Gulf countries or Arab countries in general perceive Israeli hegemony. I think contrary to what a lot of what is written, especially in Washington, D.C., I think this is not something that is 100% comforting comforting to the Gulf countries or to Arab countries in general, because they feel that if Israel is winning on every front, which so far they have been very much benefiting from and they have been capitalizing on. I mean, we cannot say that Gulf countries are concerned to see Hezbollah completely, leaving the scene in Lebanon, seeing Bashar al-Assad fall, seeing even the Iraqi militias being put back a bit into a box, seeing the Houthis being hit. We cannot really say that, they're not happy to see this happen, including the pressure on Iran, by the way. But they are very conscious that this means that Israel will come out of this as a hegemon that can just act as it pleases in the region, including, as you very accurately pointed to, something that they are all concerned about, which is, occupying more Syrian lands. And, hitting Syria and striking Syria at a time when they feel that consolidating this regime might help them control many of the regional security concerns that they have, and might reopen the space for Iran. At least this is how they see it. So that's my first my first observation on this point in particular. My second one would be about, yes, they definitely understand, but it took them time. You're absolutely right. I think it took all Gulf countries and Arab countries time to understand the psychological hit that Israel got in October 7th. I think it really took a few months and even more for them to really digest and understand what it meant for Israel, what happened. But at the same time, the overwhelming majority of them eventually adopted the narrative according to which this did not start on October 7th, and hence we need a solution to this problem. To avoid future October 7th happening again, the answer is not to displace the Gazans and to annex Gaza and the West Bank. The answer should be a solution to this conflict that avoids us all. And this brings me back to Dr. Bahgat's comment. It's not because there is some kind of ideological sympathy with the Palestinians. It's because it's contrary to their interests, to their economic, geoeconomic, and geopolitical interests to see this conflict erupt this way again. And because, as again you accurately said, they do have an interest in a relationship with Israel on the technology, defense, on AI. They do want this relationship. But they cannot have this relationship if Israel continues on this path. It makes their life way harder.
Thank you, Dr. Yasmine. Tim, actually, before I go back to Tim with one question, Dr. Gawdat, if you can hear us, please leave the studio and log back in, and I will readmit you. Tim, may I ask about your insights regarding the division within the Republican Party? You have the MAGA wing, who are isolationists, and they obviously are against any intervention, particularly in the Middle East, the forever wars that President Trump ran in the first and the second term against. And also you have a particular wing in the Republican Party as well, who view Iran as the main challenger for US presence and policy in the Middle East. What is your comment, your view about this?
Sure. There are certain folks that have been very vocal. You'll see Congressman Thomas Massie has been very vocal on this, but Thomas Massie has opposed the president, even though Massie's very conservative, he's opposed President Trump on many things, on economic packages, on a number of things. So the fact that he is opposing him verbally and publicly on this does not carry the same weight that it might if this were the first time he had stepped out of lockstep with the president. I think what was fascinating for me this past, I was in the White House on Wednesday for a matter having to do with immigration and customs enforcement with the ICE folks. And what I took note of in the White House was it was business as usual. And keep in mind, it was Tuesday and Wednesday that the national security team came together, and everyone was sitting on the edge of their seat saying, does this mean that we're going ahead with bombing? And the answer was no. Obviously, the answer was no. It was gathering information, making sure all our intelligence folks are on the same page, making sure that the president knows what all the choices are. But I think divisions, I said earlier, Congress, members of Congress, they'll have some influence, they'll have, but I don't think that's where any president really turns at times like this, because there's always a little bit of politics involved in that. And what I was going to say is, when I was in the White House, what I felt was it was business as usual. You had groups dealing with the LA riots and everything that was going on there. You had groups that were dealing with economic policy. You had groups, and which sounds like how it should be, but for most of my life, most administrations have trouble working and chewing gum at the same time. If there's a big issue, like Israel-Iran situation going on, they are solely focused on that. And I took that as a good sign that the president and his administration are still able to do everything. It tells me they are not solely focused on this. This is a priority. This is important. They take it very seriously. But it made me think, dropping bombs was not imminent. When I was there on Wednesday, somebody came out, and a friend of mine from the region who lives in Washington was very nervous that things were going to start Wednesday night. And I said, I don't think so. And he said, why? I said, it's just the vibe. It's just the feel out of the White House. No matter how good they are at looking around at a variety of issues, if there is some intent to move forward that night, nobody can bluff that well. They were focused on a lot of things, and it wasn't just on that. And I continue to see that over the last couple of days. I'm not in the White House today, but I see them talking about other issues, working on other issues. So I think the president, when he says we've got a 2-week window, sometime during those 2 weeks, he will make a decision. I think he means that. There isn't, maybe tonight will be the choice, but I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think he would love to see the Iranians come back to the table. I don't know if they will or not. As Ken said, I'm not sure that they're going to budge too far on their red line, but I think anytime you have adversaries talking, that's a good thing. Anytime you do that instead of resorting to military, that's a good thing. So my hope is that the parties at least will begin a dialogue again.
Thank you very much. Dr. Katzman, do you have any comment on this? The Republicans in the House and the Senate, how do you see them reacting?
Well, I think what I'm seeing is a lot of deference migrating to the president. I mean, I think the whole conference in the House and Senate's, even the ones who are disinclined to be involved militarily, they realize Mr. Trump is in a very tough spot. Maybe Israel put him in a tough spot, whatever. There is deference. They believe he's trying to avoid taking action. Even the ones who are dead set against the U.S. becoming involved, they recognize Mr. Trump is trying to stay out of this. He's tried to stay out of this. He's trying to pursue diplomacy. He wants a diplomatic solution. It can't just be any solution that just kicks the can down the road. So I think I'm seeing a lot of deference, even among people in the conference who are very much against, more U.S. involvement in the Middle East, warfare, U.S. strikes, U.S. military action. So I think he's got latitude, but and I think he's earned that. He's gained some of that latitude by holding back. I mean, I think if he had struck on Wednesday, as the press was whipping into a frenzy Thursday, Wednesday, that he's striking tomorrow or today, I think he would have lost a lot of that support. But the fact that he is leaving as much time for diplomacy as possible and giving every opportunity for diplomacy, even to the point of saying he himself would talk with Iranian officials personally. I think he's getting a lot of deference out of the conference, even those who are skeptical.
Thank you. Anas, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
Now we can hear you. Welcome back. I'll leave the studio.
Thank you.
I'll be on standby if anything happens.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
We have about 10-15 minutes left, so I would like to shift to the international level.
No, I'm not if you're following or not.
And Tim, if I may press you on China and Russia. China, on one side, is happy that the United States might get back down war in the Middle East. So U.S. will not focus on Taiwan. But on the other side, China imports a great deal of oil and gas from the Gulf, and this conflict will impact China's energy supplies. How do you see China in this crisis?
Well, we saw there are reports of a number of 747s from China flying discreetly into Iran, and what they're supplying exactly, nobody knows, but they are bringing something in. They, as you say, this is a big deal for them. I want to say it's 41% of their gas and oil comes from Iran. So this is a huge, if something happens to the leadership there, if there's regime change, that could have an enormous impact on the Chinese economy. So they take this very seriously, as well they should. But when you say, about the U.S. backing down, I think there's a couple of choices we keep talking about. There's the military choice or there's a diplomatic choice. But the one choice I do not see happening is that President Trump and the United States will say, okay, never mind. Just forget about it. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll go about our business, and let's pretend this never happened. I think we've gone way beyond that now. So there's going to have to be some action out of Iran in order to satisfy what the president has laid out as his agenda. I don't think that he can say, hey, if you remember, Barack Obama took great when he used the term red line in the sand and then ignored it. He took great criticism for that, even with a domestic media that loved him. The media hates Donald Trump. If Donald Trump says, here, I want a nuclear-free Iran, and then were to turn around a few weeks from now and shrug his shoulders and say, okay, never mind, let's just keep going, they'd never let it go. So that's not going to happen. And I think China knows that. So while they may try to assist and supply their friend, Iran, they also would really much rather see a diplomatic solution here. You mentioned Russia as well. And I thought it was interesting that Vladimir Putin weighed in on what should happen here. And I thought, boy, he's got a lot of fires to put out of his own. I think maybe he ought to focus on Ukraine and bringing peace about there before he worries too much about what the United States and Iran are doing.
Yeah, I'm glad, Tim, you mentioned President Putin. I suppose this tension between Israel, United States, and Iran, a kind of gift to President Putin. It is kind of distraction from U.S., Europe support to Ukraine. And I suppose President Putin is happy with this tension. It is working for him. Is this correct or wrong? Ken, are you still with us?
Oh, okay. And I didn't know who the question was to. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it works to Putin's advantage. Anything that distracts from the Ukraine war, and I see very little press about the Ukraine war now, even though it's still raging at full tilt. And it's also given Putin the opportunity to offer himself as a mediator in this conflict. He's talked to Trump and offered to mediate. I believe Trump told him to bug off, let him mediate his own war and end that before he offers to mediate this, which he has no leverage in. He doesn't control Iran. He doesn't control Israel. He doesn't control the United States. He's got no cards. Talk about no cards. He's got no cards here. So, but he's able to ingratiate himself with Mr. Trump, continue to indulge Mr. Trump to get better terms for himself on the Ukraine issue. So yeah, it's helped him absolutely, but not dramatically. I wouldn't go overboard and say Putin is a major big beneficiary of this crisis right now.
If I could just toss in there, I think the biggest benefit he gets is price of oil goes up. And Russia's in a spot where they need money, and when the price of oil and gas go up, they benefit from that. So, but politically, I see it.
This is a very good point. And Yasmine, you are working now with crisis group. As we speak today, the Iranian foreign minister met with his counterparts from Europe, from UK, France, and Germany. Does Europe have any leverage, or it is only United States?
I think that the new situation offers Europe some leverage in the sense that that meeting came, at a moment when, at least according to Minister Arakji today from Geneva, he said we're not willing to talk to the United States as long as Israel is bombarding us. So he preconditioned somehow the return of negotiations with the United States to the halt of the Israeli military campaign on Iran. So instead, you had a meeting with the E3 in Geneva, and the E3 actually were, first of all, are very harsh on Iran. They basically have the same line as the United States, but even a harsher line because they want stronger guarantees. President Trump wants both, guarantees and control over the Iranian nuclear program, including zero enrichment, but he also very badly wants the deal.
I'm sorry, it looks lost. Okay. It looks we lost Yasmine. Tim, would you like to say something about Europe? I mean, my point about Europe, when President Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal, Europe was not happy but did not do anything. Is there room for Europe? Is there any role Europe can play?
Is that the
Tim, would you like to say a few words here?
There is
You are muted, I believe.
No.
When you have leaders like Macron, who Trump thinks very little of, they're going to have no influence whatsoever.
Okay.
The Chancellor in Germany.
Should we go to Ken?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tim. Tim, we can hear Tim.
I was just going to say, you've got a mixed bag there. The Chancellor of Germany has been very supportive of this and said that went so far as to say if you had regime change in Iran, it would be a tremendous stabilizing item for the entire region. And so when you have the leader of France, who clearly he and the president of the United States have a terrible relationship, he's not going to have any influence whatsoever. So is there room for some voices in Europe? Absolutely. But are they going to have more influence on the American people, the American media, the staff that surrounds Trump, or the United States Congress? Absolutely not. They're a tiny part. It's an influence, but it's a very small influence.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim.
The next few
Dr.
weeks
Gawdat,
and the next month.
Gawdat?
And any
Dr.
final
Gawdat?
thoughts?
Can you repeat your question? I think there is a slow internet connection at your end, Dr. Gawdat. That is, you're not getting the feed at the right time, but the speakers are connected. So if you repeat your last question, please. Dr. Gawdat, can you hear? Okay, I think he dropped again. If I may go back to the Gulf, and the risk of retaliation at U.S. bases is still one of the main concerns, I think. Is there any comments on how do you think the bases are, CENTCOM or naval bases and other GCC states anticipate the situation? Yasmine?
No, please go ahead first, and then I'll.
No, thank you. I mean, I would say that would be a dramatic mistake by Iran. I mean, the supreme leader actually shocked me a little bit this week. He, threatened the United States irreparable harm. I mean, he's sitting there with no air defense, and he's threatening the country with the largest and most capable air force on the planet. I mean, what planet is this guy on? I'm sorry to be so frank, but if you're sitting there with no air defense and you've got a population to protect, you don't go threatening the United States of America and its air force. I mean, I think it would be a dramatic mistake, an unbelievable mistake to attack U.S. forces in the region. I'll defer. Go ahead, please.
Dr. Yasmine?
Sure. I just wanted to finish my thought on the Europeans. And I mean, the question was right that the Europeans, before the current situation, they didn't really have any kind of leverage. And maybe they don't have leverage, but now they have the capacity to try and offer Iran an off-ramp. And I think this is why the three of them met today with Arakji. I don't think they are going to offer any face-saving exit to Iran, because as I said, I think I stopped, I was stopped at the thought that President Trump, as was mentioned at the beginning of this panel, has the incentive of really wanting to have a deal. And this has been clear since the first administration that he wants a deal. He doesn't just want to see the nuclear program dismantled, because this, since the beginning, could have been done through war. President Trump, in his first term, he could have very well bombed Iran, which he didn't, because he wanted a deal, and because, as Tim mentioned, he wants to be, recognized as a man of peace. He did not start this. He was kind of dragged into it by the Israelis. But the Europeans are not that eager to have a deal for the sake of a deal. They have always had an interest in controlling Iran's nuclear program, and also the missiles, by the way, because they can reach Europe. So the Europeans did not have leverage before. Today, their only leverage, the only card that they're using, is that they can offer Iran an off-ramp by mediating between Iran and the United States at a moment when Iran doesn't want to talk to the US, and at the moment when Israel doesn't want Iran and the US to be talking. So that's on the first question. The second question about the bases, I believe that first of all, the fact that, Gulf countries and Iran have a better relation right now than they had before, I think this is why we haven't seen Iran yet targeting not even American targets in those countries until now. But I do believe that if the regime in Iran feels threatened, especially with Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that, he's encouraging a regime change, I think we might arrive at a moment where the Iranian regime would be so desperate to decide and, to do anything in its capacity to prevent this from happening, or the same mentality that Bashar al-Assad had before, which is, if I fall, I will not fall alone. And, I think that before targeting the Gulf countries themselves, Iran will first target American targets in the Gulf countries and in the proximity. And the militias in Iraq already issued a statement saying that if the United States becomes part of this, they will target the United States in Iraq. And I think it is the stage that the Gulf countries are very keen to avoid, because, as Kenneth said, it will be really stupid, because President Trump will definitely retaliate. We have seen this during his first administration, so he will most definitely retaliate. It is even more guaranteed that he retaliates than in the case if one of those Gulf countries is targeted itself, like we have seen in 2019.
Thank you, Dr. Yasmine. You actually answered my next question about the proxies and the role of proxies and how it might even escalate, toward US bases across the GCC and in Iraq, Ain al-Assad, in Al-Anbar, or even there are few still in, I think there are around 800 in Syria, 800 soldiers in Syria. If anyone wants to add on the expected involvement of proxies?
Let me give you a funny analogy here before I dive in. And that is, my son is a senior in college, and he was recently putting together his first in-depth business plan. And part of the plan looked at projected for revenues and so on, but it was very optimistic. It looked at only one side. I'd expect that out of a 21-year-old man that hasn't done it before. We talked about it, and then he started to put in, okay, what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? And the reason I say that's an analogy is you would think in the United States, in the biggest, most powerful military in the world with access to the greatest strategic minds there are, that they would do that they would think everything through. But historically, that's not always the case. Sometimes they only think in terms of the most optimistic scenario. Oh, we'll go in, we'll destroy this nuclear site, and that'll be that. And that is very seldom how things work, of course. So when you talk about the proxy groups, I think I've been in Baghdad 3 times this year. I was there most recently for the Arab Summit. And you look around and there's so much progress there, so many good things going on there with infrastructure, with shopping, with people feeling comfortable again. And I thought all it will take is this thing to ignite just a little. And when Baghdad gets hit, it's not just that a highway got knocked down. It's the emotional impact that has on those people who are finally seeing progress. Oops, it's all taken away again. And you know, with the change, I always describe hope as the greatest gift any human has. When you see the change in Syria, you and I might look at the interim president and think, I don't know, how's that going to work out? But it's not Assad. And so among the people of Syria, there's hope. Oh, there's change. Maybe there will be something better. Is that taken away? Is that taken? And so the domino effect of this, if the United States were to get involved and Iran decides to go ahead and hit these various U.S. spots around, the countries are the ones who suffer, and the destabilization of that really could be overwhelming.
Thank you. If I may go back to my last question before we move to the concluding remarks, the 2026 midterms, is it in the consideration, the calculus of the Republican Party? Huge casualties on our troops abroad could get public opinion quite unhappy. Thoughts on this?
I'm going to do real quick. I'll say, you know, if we're at war in Iran a year from now, yeah, that'll be a big worry. But right now, the American public's attention span is so short. I don't know if you remember, but in 2020, Donald Trump was impeached in January, leading into February of 2020. It was literally never mentioned during the campaign of that fall, because the American public's attention span is so short, they had moved on to other stuff. So we're 18 months out, 17 months out from the fall 2026 election. Americans are going to be worried about a lot of things, but what happened this previous summer is probably not going to be one of them unless this turns into a prolonged war.
Yeah. I know, Dr. Yasmine, sorry, I have to ask this question before moving to concluding remarks. I know, Dr. Yasmine, you touched on Europe and part also of the GCC, but the GCC states have, you know, clearly, as you explained, de-escalated with Iran and found that it's much cheaper for them to resolve their differences with Iran through diplomacy rather than confrontation. What are the right now, if we're going to put it in 1 minute, what are the expectations from the GCC states of the President Trump administration?
You mean with regards to the war with Iran?
In regard to U.S. involvement, President Trump has been saying that in the next 2 weeks, he will make a decision whether to be involved or not. In your opinion, what is the GCC expectations from this administration?
I think there are two schools of thought, or there are, if you want, two theories here. One of which is that, as I just said, an American attack would only escalate this and heighten the threat of a regional war by having Iran or its proxies attack American targets. But the second, you have a second, opinion that sometimes you hear in the Gulf, that maybe an American decisive strike is a strike that will put an end to this war because it will dismantle the nuclear program. It will show that Iran did not capitulate, but, was forced into dismantling its nuclear program. But the problem is the consequences of it. As we have seen in this region, and by the way, as the UAE advisor to the president, Dr. Anwar Gargash, stated, in a talk like 2 days ago, he was saying publicly, we have learned in this region that wars never solve problems on the long run, that they only make them more complicated to solve afterwards. So even if President Trump strikes Iran, comes out of this victorious and actually achieving the objective, which is, putting an end to the Iranian nuclear program, it will only be for now. And I think this is the worry of some in the Gulf countries, that this is not a long-term solution. The long-term solution is a solution that involves sustainable and long-term safeguards on the Iranian nuclear program that guarantees access on the long run, by which they themselves, but also the United States and the International Atomic Energy Agency can monitor and have access to the Iranian nuclear program. And also a strike would, maybe put an end to the nuclear program, but it doesn't only threaten or risk the regionalization of the war, but also seen from the Gulf countries is that they will have to deal with the consequences of what happens inside Iran afterwards. Is the regime going to survive this? Is it going to have, domestic instability and maybe a coup d'etat or a revolution? What then happens to the contamination of the environment around the Gulf? I mean, if Bushehr is dismantled, there are so many consequences involved in this. So there is definitely a preference for a negotiated solution. And I think this is why all Gulf countries are also pressuring Iran during the negotiations to accept, a deal with the United States. That would be their preference, rather than seeing the United States becoming party of this war, to this war.
Thank you so much. If I may move to the concluding remarks, and in 2 minutes, if you can answer one question: what is the risk of involvement or non-involvement in this war for the US? If I start with you, Dr. Yasmine.
I think I just answered that. You mean what is the possibility or the probability?
The risk of involvement or non-involvement, both, because I'm sure the decision makers, the policymakers in the US are weighing both options right now.
I mean, as I said, it really depends on how the two sides, I think, on how the two sides move from here. Whether Iran is ready, because Iran maybe, again, we're not sure, but maybe it doesn't want to meet with the US directly, but it is talking to the Europeans and it is talking to the Gulf countries. They talk to the United States. So if we have a diplomatic solution out of this that would offer a safe phase exit to Iran, then I don't think the United States will want to intervene. But I think that if within 2 weeks, this war continues, as Tim said, I think it will be up to President Trump and to the American public to decide this, and not up to the Iranians or the Israelis.
Yeah, so diplomacy. Dr. Katzman?
Well, yes, again, my presentation today is very, very pessimistic. Again, as I said, I see positionings getting very, very hardened to the point where nobody can back down. As I said earlier, Iran is absolutely refusing to accept eliminating its uranium enrichment, and Iran and Mr. Trump cannot have a deal that does not eliminate its uranium enrichment. And so we're locked into a situation where neither side can back down, and the only way is up, which is escalation. Unfortunately, that's how I see it. I do believe Mr. Trump is going to be compelled at some point to undertake military action, which will lead to retaliation. And, I see on the channels that there is a certain what I'd call war fever building, which is a lot of the experts that are appearing on TV now are bringing up all the 45 years of problems with Iran, the hostage crisis, the hostages in Beirut, the 600 US soldiers killed in Iraq by Iran, the Marine barracks bombing. All of these things are being dredged up for the public to be reminded about. And, again, Mr. Trump cannot come out of this with a deal that is any less than the full elimination of Iran's uranium enrichment program. And Iran seems to be, the supreme leader seems to not care what happens to his people. He's going to dig in on that position. And we're locked into, I think, a situation where the only pathway is toward escalation. And to be honest, Ines, I would not even rule out that this could even result in some element of U.S. ground involvement here. I mean, that's a very frightening possibility, but we've seen this throughout history. The battleship Maine, which got us into the Spanish-American War, the famous Gulf of Tonkin resolution on Vietnam. You know, it's easy. It's an easy pathway to go from where we are to the unimaginable. And so I don't want to frighten the audience, but that's kind of where I am today.
Yeah, I'm afraid many analysts also share this this view. Tim?
You know, what we've seen, despite American media making Donald Trump out to be some sort of warmonger at times, what we've seen in his first administration, we saw it too, is a clear desire for peace and a clear desire for diplomacy. How he goes about that may be different than many, but his end goal is crystal clear. I think of when Iran shot down an American drone, there were certain security personnel within the White House, national security team members that were whispering in the president's ear, here's your opportunity to raise heck on Iran. And he chose not to. He said, you know, no one was killed in this. We'll do something in kind. We'll, you know, respond, but we're not hurt anyone. We don't need this. I think what we've seen in real life with these two countries is the president has, unfortunately, what I have seen from the Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah, is literally on the day they were signing the agreement with the Obama administration, he was leading chants of death to America, death to America. And so the pride factor among the leadership in Iran is far greater than the survival of his people. And I do think that he will refuse. The Supreme Leader will say no, no matter what. No matter what the threat is, he will say no, and that it will nudge the United States into taking some sort of action. My full expectation is Iran realizes it's not going to beat the might of the U.S. military, but it can wreak a lot of havoc. And so you are going to have people suffer. They're going to try to hit U.S. targets in surrounding countries, and you will have those countries suffer, their people there suffer. And so I'm unfortunately pessimistic as well, not because of the direction the administration is taking. I really believe they are trying every opportunity for diplomacy. But Ken's 100% right. There's no way they're going to back down. They're not going to simply give up and walk away at this point. So when Iran refuses diplomacy, that first domino will fall, and I think a lot of people are going to get hurt.
Thank you all very much for joining us, and apologies for the technical problems. That was very enriching and insightful discussion. Our next panel is on Monday on discussing the impact of this confrontation on energy market and the GCC states' economies. Again, thank you for joining, and I wish everyone a great weekend.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Ines. Thanks, Kenneth.